welcome to the IdeaCast interview series, episode 39. My guest in this episode is Dr. Ronald Alexander, and Dr. Alexander is a clinical psychotherapist and as well a leading creativity and communication coach. He is also an executive and leadership coach. And in this conversation, Dr. Alexander and I discuss his latest book, Core Creativity, The Mindful Way to Unlock Your Creative Self. And whether you're beginning a mindfulness practice and trying to develop your creativity, or you're a seasoned mindfulness practitioner and you're looking for a way to add another dimension to your practice, this book is good, and I highly recommend it. It is an interactive book, and so we'll unpack all of that in the conversation. It was a pleasure speaking with Dr. Alexander, and I do hope you enjoy this conversation. And thank you for joining us. And I'd like to thank and welcome Dr. Ron Alexander for coming on the IdeaCast interview series. And today we are going to talk about his new book, which I believe just came out last week, called Core Creativity. I've read the book and was very impressed by it, and I am looking forward to an interesting and informative conversation with Dr. Alexander. So welcome, Dr. Alexander. So glad to have you on the show.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Justin.
Absolutely. Pleasure on my end too. And so to the folks watching, I'd like to just go over a couple of quick points on the book. I found it to be a informative but accessible book. There's not a lot of deep technological jargon there, you know, like philosophy speak or psych speak or anything like that. It's very accessible, but nonetheless, it's again informative. It's a pure heuristic as far as learning not only to be mindful in meditation, but to be mindful in day-to-day life when we're moving through life, moving through experience. And that was a takeaway for me. I also, the book is interactive. It is not only a book that you read from front to back, but it is packed full of mindfulness exercises. And at the end there in the last chapter, Dr. Alexander integrates the various exercises into functional modalities. They're working with each other. And I really appreciate that, because it helps if you're not a seasoned meditator or you're a seasoned mindfulness practitioner, that you can be guided by Dr. Alexander to go further and deeper than some other books might go. So anyway, that's my impression that I was given by having read the book. And so now we're going to move into discussing the book and discussing some of the aspects of the book that I think are really important, that would be relevant to drawing out your curiosity, those of you who are here enjoying this conversation with us. So Dr. Ron, let's talk about the title of the book, Core Creativity. And I know there are, I believe there are 3 steps to this core creativity. So let's discuss that if that's cool with you.
Yeah, and I'd like to say that we can understand, first and foremost, that creativity is available for every person. You can be creative. A mother can be creative about how they run a household or how they prepare meals. You can be creative about how you run your team in your business or organization. As a psychologist and psychotherapist, I'm creative that each and every time that I meet with a patient or a client, if I'm doing creativity in executive leadership coaching, is that it's important to have a mindset that creativity could be understood in 2 different domains of operation. Ordinary creativity usually involves being in touch with your spontaneity and reassembling ideas or concepts that already are in existence. And ordinary creativity is pulling those together and reorganizing them or reassembling them or adding on to something that was already uniquely sourced. And in 1993, I had the unique opportunity to attend some of the music shows at the Royal Dublin Showgrounds in Ireland, and get together with some of the members of the band after the show. And one of them, the lead guitarist, was sharing with me that he, after they finished the Joshua Tree album, he had been hearing the lyrics and hearing the new rhythms of their new work, which was Achtung Baby, for months and months, and he was even dreaming about them. And we were just having a personal social conversation because I had no professional involvement with him or anybody, with somebody in the organization, but nobody in the band. And I had just come from visiting several days in a row Mozart's house in Vienna, Salzburg, prior to arriving in Dublin. And one of the things that I read when you're in his house or the museum is that oftentimes he would receive downloads of the music that he was creating. And it just occurred to me that two things. One was, well, that's core creativity, bringing online something that is fresh, original, unique, that no one else prior to you and that download has ever downloaded that. Mm-hmm. And in a very relaxed way, he said, well, what would you call that? And I said, well, and I coined this term for both Western psychology and introduced it into the field of Buddhist psychology, because both of my books are about mindfulness. Mindfulness comes from Buddhist psychology. And I said, that's called open mind. That the great creatives, whether it's Mozart, Beethoven, the Beatles, U2, Jackson Pollock, the great painter, Mark Rothko, modern painters, that they go into through, it's either a natural, spontaneous state of intuitive receptivity. And that first state is what I deem as absorbing mind, where, like the band U2, after they finished the Joshua Tree album, they went and spent a considerable amount of time living and working in Berlin because they wanted to immerse themselves into absorbing mind. They wanted to go to art museums and underground music clubs and attune to the creative muse, the zeitgeist of the time. And in absorbing mind, you absorb things first, and I encourage people in the book, the new book, Core Creativity, to go to art museums, to take walks in nature, to take in music, to look through art books, to read poetry, to do things that ordinarily they wouldn't do because it's outside of their own sphere or their own mindset, and to immerse themselves in this creative stream of creativity. And from absorbing mind, which you absorb from the outside world through this immersion in creative avenues of exploration, that you then take time each and every day to go into what I call creativity stillness or meditative mind. And in creativity stillness, there's a slowing down. It's a process of like receiving and what I call capturing the creative download by bringing online your left prefrontal cortex. And what we've learned from neuroscience is that the minimal of 20 minutes of mindfulness meditation practice, once or twice a day, over a course of 12 weeks, upwards to 3 months, will begin to strengthen your capacity and your ability to bring online open-minded consciousness. and it'll strengthen your prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for things like creativity and imagination. And so in writing the book, I spent actually, people say, how long did you spend? Well, 3 years in the actual process of writing a book proposal and then the actual writing of the book. But I spent 4.5 decades, first here in Los Angeles, in television, film, music, and in the .com industry in the last 15 years of working with creatives, both, interestingly enough, both creatives who are directly responsible for being a writer or a director or a producer or a musician in a band or a sculpturist or a writer, as well as the suits in various music studios in town, Disney, Universal Pictures, who are responsible for picking projects. And so I found that by counseling them and coaching individuals about open mind and absorbing mind, that was a very important step to encourage people to take, that they could do each day, that would then set in motion for the individuals, whether it was the artists themselves or it was the suit trying to make an executive decision about should we sign and do a record deal with this person or a film deal with that person. It helped to fine tune their own ability at picking, perceiving, and then fundamentally, which is important that I write about through the whole book, is using one's intuition, trusting one's gut. You know, we oftentimes think that when you hear somebody in the music industry having a great hit, that, well, maybe it was just, you know, pure luck that they were signed. But in addition to this notion of luck in being signed to anything, is that it takes skill. And you have people in the record industry who were masters at being able to listen. Take, for example, when David Geffen, he was his assistant, professional assistant, gave him a demo of Jackson Browne before Jackson Browne was Jackson Browne. He was a 17-year-old kid. And Geffen didn't listen to the tape. And so the assistant listened to it. And then she went into his office one day and she said, David, you really have to listen to this demo. And so he listened to like 2 tracks and he was completely blown away, just absolutely blown away. And said, okay, we get this kid in, you know, we've got to sign him. So Geffen is somebody who has always been known in both music and then his venture into film as somebody who really trusted his gut. And that's one of the themes that I focus on throughout the book, is the importance of whether you're an executive or you're a talent or you're in, as many of us are, going about our lives creatively, we really have to learn to trust our intuition, which starts with trusting the gut.
And in your book, you reference a really good example about a CEO of a corporation who purposely took himself out into the woods and went through the paces or the motions of being in nature, being open to the absorbing process, but nonetheless went with the head over what would be more the intuitive, and later regretted it. And then I believe you also reported in your own life that you were working on an earlier book, and you had gone to Greece and you were swimming, and or prior to having gone, I just blew that. You were, you know, working on a book and you were stuck and you were locked up, and you had given yourself a set time. And you went out for a swim, and therein came the next chapter to you. So
that's right. So this executive that I talk about in the book was having to make a very, very big and major decision. about an acquisition.
Mhm.
And he had a summer home up in Northern California, and he would frequently take walks when there was difficult decisions to make, as well as creative decisions. And his out in the walk, his gut was telling him no, 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 no. And his head was screaming at him, yes, 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 yes,
Mm.
because he was feeling pressured that everything along the lines of the internet was moving in a particular direction. And he was, his head was telling him, you don't want to miss this boat or this wagon. You
Mhm.
need to get on board. And so, interestingly enough, when we were having lunch, I said to him, well, did you ever think of like calling somebody and bouncing your process that your gut was telling you no, and your head was screaming at you yes? And he said, I really, he stopped and paused, and he said, that's the biggest regret of my life.
Mm.
And so that's where in my book, I introduced the notion in both the first book and then this book called Creativity, that we all need to have what I call two things. One is a council of support.
Mhm.
Council of support is a group of very unique, and they can be multi-talented, but a council of support, for example, I have my accountant and my attorney on my council of support, as well as other best-selling authors, and I have musicians on my council of support, and I have a psychologist on my council of support, people that can help you bounce off your creative ideas and or your business decisions. Sometimes they're money ideas or money decisions to make about, do we invest more and go down the road into hundreds of new oil wells down there in Texas? And to bounce ideas like that off of others so that you can get direct and confrontive and solid support. You have people that will challenge you and not just be yes people to you.
Mhm.
Second concept that I cultivated in the new book is called a creativity pod. And I suggest to all the creatives that I coach that they either start a creativity pod or they find one that's already in existence. And for example, I was from 1985 to 1990, and my creativity pod included 12 others, very highly screenwriters, directors, filmmakers, producers, and there were a couple of actors in the group. And we would all bring in our ideas and our concepts for projects. And not only would we get in a creativity pod, not only do you get the creative stimulus, but you get feedback from very seasoned people who have been in the trenches for decades, say like myself today.
Mhm.
And so I learned very early on when I was in my mid-30s that the more creative feedback you get that's honest and clear, and that you have people in your creativity pod that aren't afraid to confront you. But a very important thing that I stress in the book is you want to make sure that you're working with, in either of the two, the council of support or the creativity pod, that you have people that are capable of supporting, affirming, confirming, nurturing your creative ideas so that they don't become the replication of some of the negativity that we experienced with, say, our skeptical parents
Mhm.
when we were growing up. There's two types of parents. There's the parent that when you say when you're 5 years old or 7, I want to be a policeman or a fireman, or, I want to be a famous musician. They say, oh, gee, those are very difficult objectives to achieve. Those are very difficult occupations. You want to have people that say, wow, Dr. Ron, that's a fantastic idea. And have you thought of going this way with it rather than that way with it?
Mhm.
That's a creative person. And when I'm doing creativity coaching and or executive coaching, I don't come down hard on people with a negativity bias.
Mhm.
Even, for example, if I know that it's very, very difficult to open up a certain pathway in one's professional life, that is a really difficult, like starting in the music business. Your kid graduates from Cal Arts or Berkeley School of Business. Well, you don't want to fire hose people. You don't want to throw cold water on their creativity or their creative pursuits. But you also want to have a certain kind of sober levity that you bring to the conversation. So for example, I'll say to people, well, are you aware that it's going to take probably 3 years, 5 years, could take you a decade to really break through. I was working with a renowned creative in the music business, and she told me that when she got out of college, she spent 10 years playing all the small clubs that she could,
Mhm.
all over the East Coast, all over the West Coast, before she penned a particular song and then had this huge breakthrough and broke the glass ceiling for herself and opened everything up. And so it's essential that you have people on both your council of support and your creativity pod that can nurture your creativity and encourage you, but at the same time, be present to give you some reality checks about time, space, place, and perseverance. That creatives need to persevere. They need to apply sweat and what I call grit, that you need to bring grit to the process of your idea formations.
Yeah, grit and perseverance and patience and delayed gratification mindset. So to clarify, the creativity support pod, in having read your book, strikes me as being more of a structural, organized, say a group that meets on a regular basis, whereas your Wisdom Council of Support or your Council of Support is sort of if you have people orbiting around you, it's more loosely affiliated. And if you have to reach out, as you said, to your attorney and get something in that aspect of support, or somebody with accounting background or a creative background, that may not be in your support pod. So we would see the creativity support pod as being more of like, we meet every 6 weeks or we meet once a month. And I reach out to my council of support when I have an inquiry or I have a moment of fork in the road or indecision. Is that accurate to say it that way?
That's very well said, Justin. The only thing I would add to that is the Wisdom Council of Support. That's right. There are people in your orbit,
okay,
that you seek, and I call it wise counsel of, and they can be, for example, a mentor that you might have mentored with in graduate school or while you're doing your internship, whether it's like, for me, it was a clinical internship, and become a psychotherapist at first. But then after that ended, I found someone who was a consultant, and I learned back before the buzzword coaching was popular. I learned about how to become a coach and how to become a creativity consultant. And from time to time, I will pull down and call up or email something and run it by that person as on what I call it as needed basis. Whereas the creativity pod, ideally, in the pod I was involved with in the mid 80s, we met every week on a Monday night, and we would start with a dinner at 7 o'clock, and we would go 10 to 11 o'clock at night. And we did that for 5 to 7 years. Creativity pods, it's best to either meet weekly, bi-weekly, or once a month. And then some individuals become so creative that the demands of the work that they're trying to get off the ground become so consumptive that oftentimes they can only get together maybe once every 3 months or once or twice a year. But consistency in a creativity pod is really, really important, in the same way that my Zen garden outside, it's blooming and flourishing because I water it and I give it fertilizer, and both myself, I garden in it, as well as I have a gardener. So as much attention that you can give to yourself in terms of creative and psychological, emotional support, spiritual support, it goes a very long way to nurturing the projects that you want to get off the ground. And then I say in core creativity, every project has a beginning arc, a middle arc, and then a coming down arc. And attention, perseverance, fortitude, and concentration is needed in all three of those arcs. Mm. That's what separates, for example, someone feeling like they're really winning at their creative pursuit versus that they're always just struggling. I'll give you another example. I had a young film student from one of the universities, and she was the daughter of a very renowned director in episodic television. And she would go for 3 or 4 hours every day. She told me before she came to start working with me that she would sit at Starbucks or this other coffee shop and make notes. And so I asked her to bring in the notes. And I was expecting a couple of yellow pads. And she had to come in with a box.
Oh my goodness.
There were binders of notes on various television and film projects that she would every day go to Starbucks or go to this other coffee place, Intelligentsia, and she would write down all of her creative ideas.
Wow.
She couldn't ever quite move it from idea generating, which is what we do in absorbing mind, which is the first stage of core creativity, to actually writing a screenplay. Mm. So what I did is I said, okay, so over the course of the next month, you're going to have a different assignment. I'm going to assign to you that when you were in film school, you learned how to be what's called a script writer, a script reader, and to give notes to a fellow student on their screenplay that they would be submitting for their final project at USC Film School. And you're going to take one of each of these huge journals, and the assignment is that's a script. And what I want you to do is to distill the core themes of each of these journals, make bullet points of it for the idea for the ones that are involved in TV, the ones that are involved in film. And you're going to give notes to yourself, and you're going to bring those in. And what we did is through months of conversation, we helped to structure and sculpt together her distilling down the box full of notes to what's the top 3 screenplays that you're now ready to write from having distilled and edited down. So people oftentimes, because they're so creative, and many people are very, very right brain oriented, they can't get out of the capture state where they're always capturing great creative ideas. And so that's where, if you have a creativity pod or you're working with a consultant or a creativity coach, that's what our job is to do, is to help you to distill down everything that you've captured. And then the third part of of core creativity. You know, there's absorbing mind, there's open mind, and then there's generating mind. And in generating mind, what you do is you take what you have downloaded and you distill it down, and then you have to put it into practice. You have to create, you have to generate something. And that's where it usually takes a lot of discipline to work at, bring to fruition all the wonderful things that you've been downloading from absorbing mind and open mind. And there was two people you mentioned. Oh yeah, the guy that walked in the woods.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I said to him after that conversation was about 6 months later, is I said, well, what did you learn from listening to the screaming cognitive mind? And he said, what I've learned most, and it was a hard price to pay, was the importance, first and foremost, trust your gut.
Mm.
That your gut, the body never lies. And he said, over the course of my career, and this was a guy that was extremely successful in corporate America, and he didn't have much of a track record of having ever made a bad decision about anything. And he said, I always trusted my gut. And so it's important to trust your gut because your intuition is speaking to you. And then the second thing that I learned is when you have that screaming voice and there's this conflict between the cognitive brain, what the mind's telling you, and what the body's telling you, is to find someone to sit with you, like you, Dr. Ron. I wish I had come across you, and to get the supportive care to separate out. In core creativity, I use this.
I went ahead and muted you, so if you want to unmute. Okay, there we go.
Sorry, I have that turned off. I don't know why.
No problem. It was a musical break. There you go. A little intermission. So anyway, so you were able to get him to sort things out, and much like the young lady with all the books, is to get into the ability to bracket what the mind is saying, and then also what are you receiving from the intuition.
Yes, and the importance of that is that when you're in a conflict, and in the book, I use Gestalt therapy, and Gestalt therapy is a method. It was developed by Fritz Perls and his wife Laura Perls and Paul Goodman and Isidore Fromm and a whole host of other characters in New York City. And Gestalt means whole, and means the integration of the body, the mind, and the spirit. And one of the principles of Gestalt therapy is working in the here and now and helping people to move from what the mind is saying to listening to the body. We call that listening to the somatic voice. And as this individual said to me in that lunch, that he wished that he had listened to his body, because one of the things that he always knew in corporate decisions is that the body never lies. Your mind can lie to you all the time about a decision, but your body won't. So like, even if you make a decision like he did, he, in his gut, in his stomach, the day that it was time for him to pull the trigger on this huge corporate decision, his body was on fire all the way going into the office. And his body was saying, no, 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 call in sick, take another day. This is not the time of the day to do this. He didn't do that. And most of the creatives that I interviewed for the book, they all said something that was very confirming of what I was writing about, which is that most of all of their success was attributed to that they trusted their intuition every time they were involved in a choice point. And many of the creatives that I interviewed in the book also said they had, without even knowing about a council of support or a pod, creativity pod, is they all had people that they bounced ideas off of. You know, some had their psychoanalysts, some had their therapists, some had fellow filmmakers, some had fellow musicians. I had the wonderful opportunity of being at a very renowned drummer's home on several occasions that I knew from his son in graduate school. And I was the professor. And so I would go over there for some of the adult son's birthday parties. And this drummer would take me into his studio and show me his studio. And he said, after I sit quietly and silently, and it can be 5 minutes to even sometimes over an hour, I run my fingers across the frets of my guitar and the strings, waiting for the guitar to tell me which direction to go with. And I trust that because my body speaks to me. So it's really important to trust your body, not listen to the negative inner voice. And so in Gestalt therapy, one of the techniques that I use, and I call it the Gestalt method for resolving one of these head, heart, and sometimes it can be spiritual or creative conflicts, is to separate and have a person sit on different pillows. So they start out in the main chair as themselves, and they're talking about what the conflict is. And I'll suggest, okay, so let's put a pillow over here or a chair, and that's your head speaking. And then over here, let's put a pillow that represents your intuition, your body. And then over here, let's put a pillow that's going to represent the spiritual flow of your creativity. And then I'll ask each of the parts to communicate to each other. So we externalize the internal conflict. Okay. Then a person is able to very quickly come to a place of seeing that, oh, wow, my cognitive brain is really driving me off a cliff if I go listen to you, whereas my body is bringing me online to trust that I need to go into this direction. And then, of course, the spiritual self always has the most extraordinary component of bringing wisdom or a wise nature to a conflict that needs to be sorted out.
Yeah, that's very clever. And I know there's some content creators on YouTube that do what you just described, but in a kind of a parody send-up sense. And so they'll have, through the magic of videography, they'll have themselves at a table, and there's 3 or 4 of them, and each of them is an aspect of personality or maybe a part of their neuroses. You know, there's the jealous person, there's the happy, you know, hippie kind of person, and so they get themselves in multimodal, personality setups where they're all a committee of themselves on the table, and but it's a good signifier or a good metaphor for what you just described, and getting people to open themselves up and see that there are these aspects of being or aspects of the self that can get in resonance with each other and get more communicating, just like in our brain, you know, the working between parts of the brain. So
I think I wrote about it in the book, that I was applying to graduate school. I was studying at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. And I was applying to graduate schools.
Oh, yeah.
And I was trying to make a decision. And head was saying one thing. One of my clinical supervisors was trying to guide me in another direction to a more kind of a traditional academic avenue. And so my therapist at the time said, well, why don't you dream about it, Ron?
Mm.
So that night I dreamt, and I woke up in the morning, and the first dream that I had was that I was in a covered wagon. And I was with, at first I thought it was my girlfriend, but then I realized when I was doing the dream work, which is necessitates writing the dream down,
Okay.
and then the Gestalt therapy method is you become each and every part of the dream, because from Gestalt therapy perspective, we see ourselves as the writer, the producer, the director, the actors of every part of the dream, as well as all the inanimate objects in the dream.
Okay.
And so there was I was in the seat of the covered wagon, holding the reins of these two horses. And there was this other person or being, let's just say, again, I thought it was my girlfriend, but the more I got into the dream, I realized it was this, let's just call it a wisdom person.
Mm.
And at a certain point, we were in the wagon and we were about to go over the Donner Pass in the Sierras. And I had a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, because I had to make a decision. Do I go right and head up north, and New England is in the north, or do I go left and go down across the Sierras? And this co-rider with me, the wisdom voice in the dream, said, there's gold in their hills. And so in the dream, I went up and over the Sierras, and I saw the Golden Gate Bridge, San Francisco. And in the dream, I had this complete and total sense of relaxation. Like, oh, yes, that's my gold mine. Go to graduate school out west, which then led to my having the opportunity to study with all of the great masters in psychology and in meditation of the times, and to receive a prestigious offer for an internship at Letta Army Medical Center in San Francisco. And then from there, I went down to Santa Monica and started my private practice at the Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, where I was exposed to all of these prolific creatives. And so the gold in the dream, the gold in them there hills, on the surface level, one would think, well, gold mines, go out west. But if you put that all together, is mine through your dream for the gold mine of making the decision, no, don't go up north to graduate school, go out west. And then from that one decision and that one dream, I created a life of very successful private practice as a psychotherapist. I started a mind-body healing clinic at Cedars-Sinai. It was one of the first holistic and behavioral medical centers in America, called the Center for Health and Healing. And then I participated in being involved in several graduate school university positions to teach on their faculties. And then, as I said earlier, I connected up with this creativity pod, which then led me to this creativity consultant who shaped with me and mentored me how to become a creativity and a leadership coach. And one gold mine after another kept unfolding to then the writing of the books and continuing to flourish and prosper, all by accepting the wisdom in that dream. A covered wagon. The other component of it was that you're covered, Ron. You're not going to be twisting out in the wind. You've got a wagon that when it storms, snows or rain, you can go inside and you're covered. that was my higher self saying, we've got you covered. Like, it's okay. Trust, hold the reins. And then that was another part of Gestalt work that came out of the dream, just to hold the reins, that
Mhm.
you've got the horses. Now all you've got to do is make the decision. Do you go up north, or do you go left and go symbolically over the mountains and discover the gold?
Mm. That's a really a real powerful connection with, and you've mentioned this before in interviews, the what Jung calls the collective unconscious and the stream. The field of subjectivity is another way I like to hear it, or like to think of it myself. And so let me ask you, actually, let me tie in one thing about the Council of Support that you had mentioned in the book. And for folks watching, I want to mention this, and you can add on to it if you would, please. Is that if you find that in that orbit of the Council of Support that you no longer find somebody to be relevant or necessary, that you can mix and match, and you can bring new players in, new persons in to help facilitate what it is that you're actually trying to achieve with that support pod. So to the audience, I would say, and this is all in the book, and also in Dr. Ron's blogs on his website, and all relevant information will be down below in the description field. Now, Dr. Ron, I would ask you, in having just described this really profound dream that obviously had a huge impact on your life, can you talk to that process before you go to bed, or the setup prior to that, and help folks that are now intrigued to facilitate that?
Yeah, I would encourage everybody to explore their dreams. And the best couple of books that I can think of, well, three. One is Memories, Dreams, and Reflections by Carl Jung, who you just referenced, who's the first spiritual psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
He was a student of Freud, and he was studying with Freud, and he and Freud had taken a steamship to go and give lectures on psychoanalysis at in Worcester.
Oh, okay.
And it was either Worcester or at Tufts. And he had a series of dreams that every morning Freud and he would share their dreams at breakfast on the ship ride over from Europe to America. And Dr. Jung had a series of dreams where Freud died, and he died it was like 3 or 4 dreams. And Freud, being a Freudian, interpreted it and became hostile and aggressive towards his mentee, Dr. Jung, that Jung was suffering from Oedipal anxiety and wanted to act out his murderous rage in some way.
on Freud. Yeah, that's Freud. Freudian. Yeah.
Annihilate him or destroy him or betray him.
Get the father out of the way, kind of thing. Yeah.
Kill the father. The old saying, you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him.
Kill him, yeah.
And for Jung, who had been in touch with his intuition since he was like 5 years old, in the beginning of Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, he talks about one of his very first dreams. Going down, he was in a village green, and he goes down a rabbit hole, a rabbit leads him down a rabbit hole, and his unconscious opened up to him, and he had this huge falling out with Freud. And from that trip, he decided to go on his own way and start writing about spiritual psychology and bringing in not only the conscious mind, the preconscious mind, the unconscious, but Jung introduced what's called the collective unconscious, which core creativity comes from the collective unconscious. And so at night, when you're doing dream theory, dream skill work, and there's 2 other books. One is this called The Little Book of Dreams, and I think it's by Bosniak or something like that.
Okay.
And then the third is Gestalt Therapy Verbatim by Fritz Perls. That's really good to work with the dream the way that I work with my dreams and with my clients and on my patients. And so what I suggest that everyone do is you lay down on your pillow, and before you close your eyes, you simply tap 3 to 7 times. In the morning, I will remember my dreams upon awakening. And you do that 3 to 7 times.
Okay.
And then you close your eyes, and the first stage of transition from the conscious mind to the sleep state is called the preconscious mind. And that's usually where sometimes if you're observant and you're willing to hang out, before you fall asleep, it's called the hypnagogic state. And the hypnagogic state is when you start to witness and observe all the wonderful pictures, stories, sometimes multi-layered colors that pass before your mind's eye. And then you go into the sleep state, and then your unconscious kicks in, because there's 2 processes in our central nervous system. There's the voluntary and there's the involuntary. And so when we fall asleep, what keeps us breathing and alive is the involuntary nervous system. Even though we're asleep at the wheel, so to speak, of motoring the self and taking care of the self, the involuntary nervous system, it's alive and well. It's not asleep, it's present, which then allows us to be able to sleep. And then towards the latter part of sleep, you have what's called REM sleep. And REM is connected to rapid eye movement. And in the latter part of the sleep cycle, whether it's the 7th hour or the 8th hour, depending on how often, how much time you sleep, sometimes it's the 5th hour, you start having longer periods of deep sleep where you dream. And a lot of people will say, well, I never remember my dreams. Well, you're still dreaming. And once you teach them how to remember the dreams, they come back into the office and they say, oh my God, I'm dreaming every night. I wasn't even aware that I dream. So it's important to also, when you awaken, the first thing is you open your eyes, but if you want to do dream recovery, is to close your eyes and just watch the dream or the dream fragments or the dream imagery pass before the mind's eye.
Okay.
And then once you capture them, because capturing, like I said, in an absorbing mind, the first stage of core creativity is you capture the entire dream. And sometimes it's a series of dreams. Sometimes people dream the same dream in 3 different formats that night, while other people might dream the same dream over the course of a week. And then what we call unfinished business dreams are dreams that sometimes we have over the course of a life cycle until we work with the dream and we're able to transform while we're having the repetition of that dream. In my early 20s, when I was having a lot of anxiety about my competence and my skillfulness, and they call it the imposter syndrome.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you're doing really well and you're getting all these accolades. And then there's a little voice inside that says, but if they only knew.
Right. I'm a sham. I'm a sham.
Yeah, that's right. You're a fake, you're a fraud.
Yeah.
So in my 20s, I would have this recurring dream that I was taking my final exam in undergraduate school. And I kept not being able to find my way to the exam hall.
Oh, okay.
So I did, and many people have that, and they have it in different variations, that they're in a basketball game and the buzzer goes off and they take the shot, but the ball, they lose the ball. They don't know where the ball is.
Right.
And so what you do in Gestalt therapy work is, I said to this one basketball player, I said, so go back inside, now visualize, connecting your eyes to the lines on the basketball and following it all the way into the net and see it go in. He did that, and then like he opened his eyes up in the office and he said, wow, I really got that. It's not that I'm afraid of my skill. It's I'm afraid of how skillful I am. And then from that time on, he became the all-time leading scorer in the venue that he was playing basketball in.
Wow. Pulled that blockage out of the way and off you went.
Yeah.
And I believe you said in an interview that it's not so much that we're afraid of failure, it's that we're afraid of success. And that kind of rings a little bit to me in what you just said about the basketball player's apprehension to perform or to complete the shot to get it to be successful. That almost speaks to that idea that, and I hope you did say that, but if not, I know you know it, that we fear success, right?
Yeah, your memory is great, but like everything, I want to, as a writer, give credit where credit is really due.
Okay.
The actual phrase comes from, and for about 15 years, unfortunately, it kept being attributed to Nelson Mandela. Actually came from the New Age thought thinker, Marianne Williamson.
Oh, okay.
She's the one that posited the phrase, our greatest fear is not of failing, but of succeeding, becoming everything that we're capable of becoming. And what I see in the work that I do is that really rings true. People, particularly when they have creativity blocks, they oftentimes think they're blocked because they're afraid they don't have anything to offer. That if, like that woman, if she sits down and opens up the journals and edits and distills them down, there'll be nothing really there of substance. But the greatest fear is if I sit down and I distill all that and I start writing or painting or playing music or bringing my creativity full force, 1,000% to my team at my business or law firm, that I will be successful, that I will be able to actualize all of my potential. That's where the big fear is.
Okay.
It is a fear. I had to struggle with fear that I would fail at things, but my greatest fear was, well, what if I can write books? And what if people read them? And what if?
Right.
That's the bigger fear, that I won't be that average kid in Boston High. What if I break out of that and I become, and this is connected to core creativity, is core creatives are able to make the leap from ordinary creativity or traditional creativity to extraordinary creativity. And that involves trusting yourself and working through your fear of becoming everything that you're capable of becoming. And I think it was Werner Erhard from the EST training who coined the phrase that then the military started doing commercials with, which is be all you can be. Some of those on television.
Yeah. Yep.
Army recruiter, be all that you
The jingle. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it resonates too, and I always love the other aphorism that we get more done by 8 a.m. than most people do in a day. That stuck with me. And it's like, I'm an early morning. I used to be a vampire when I was in my 20s, but now I'm an early morning guy. And I'm like, yeah, I love that because I get a lot done before 9 myself. But, I like that, taking that in. Dr. Ron, we had talked prior to hitting record and starting this conversation that you had a stop time. And so I want to honor that. And so let's wrap things up. And so having just written and published this book on core creativity, and I like to ask my guests, this is kind of a standard question as we're going out the door. What's on the horizon for you? What's your next creative endeavor, or just an idea that you have that you would be happy to share with the community, and where are you heading that you can share?
Very intensely into the book launch, doing a lot of seminars and webinars like this, print media. I'll be on top 20 radio stations FM all over the country, then doing some television. And the number one thing, in addition to all of that, which is distilling down the book to an 18-minute TED Talk.
Oh,
So
good.
that's something I've never done.
Okay.
And that's on the works, and it's going to take about 4 to 5 months. And I've even hired a creativity coach to help me distill down the entire book to 18 minutes so that I'm very polished and I can come out of the gate and conduct that.
Awesome. A TED specific wisdom councils of support. I like that. And that speaks to that, the interchangeability of those folks that come in, that are in your orbit, that it's essential to keep that fresh and relevant. So awesome. Awesome. If I do catch the TED Talk, I'll put it in a link down below so that folks can go to that. But that'll be a few months off, but I will keep my eyes up for it because I would like to hear that TED Talk. I think that'll be really neat. So Dr. Ron, thank you so very much for your time. To the audience, I thank you for your time and thank you for sticking all the way to the end of this conversation. I look at my analytics and I keep about 10%, and those guys are awesome. Persons are awesome. So thank you so much.
And I just wanted to add one more thing. Sometimes people want to know how to get a hold of me.
Yes.
You can go to corecreativity.com or ronaldalexander.com. And the title of the book is Core Creativity, The Mindful Way to Unlock Your Creative Self.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I highly recommend the book. I read it. I enjoyed it. And it's going to stay in my stable. I call it my toolbox. It's my utility box of useful tools that I can pull out and work with. As I said, heuristic. I love that word. It's just a teaching aid. And again, all relevant information that he just described will be in the description field for you to access. Any of his websites, any relevant social media, and we will get you connected. And I might even sneak in a couple of things from your YouTube channel where you talk about core creativity. There's some videos you did in this time 2 years ago in July of 2020, and I want to make sure they're available. And so that will be accessible as well. Dr. Ron, thank you again. It was a wonderful conversation and it was wonderful meeting you and having this time with you. I very much appreciate it. I'll say goodbye to you after we stop the record. To the YouTube audience, thank you very much for joining us and staying with us. Appreciate it.